My name is Elena Hart. I'm 31 years old. The night before my wedding, my mother called me at 11:43 p.m. Her voice was calm but sharp as glass. She told me it wasn't too late to cancel and asked me not to embarrass the family. Then she hung up before I could say anything. My father had already done his part. Earlier that week, he sent me a 4-page letter, formal, detached, and devastating. He wrote about values, expectations, and compatibility. He said love alone wasn't enough and called my relationship a mistake I would eventually regret. I listened to my mother's voicemail 3 times before it truly sank in. It wasn't just anger or disappointment, it was final. They weren't coming. I had sent out 62 invitations to my side of the family: parents, my brother, extended relatives, family friends. Not a single RSVP came back. At first, I thought it was a delay or some misunderstanding. It wasn't. A cousin eventually forwarded me the email my mother had sent. It was addressed to everyone I had invited. In it, she explained that they would not attend my wedding and strongly implied others shouldn't either. She framed it as a matter of principle, of protecting family values. The reason was simple. My fiancé worked nights as hospital security. To them, that defined him entirely. They didn't know anything else about him. They didn't know how people looked at him with quiet gratitude. They didn't know the way his phone rang at odd hours with urgency in every call. They didn't know the way he carried responsibility without ever talking about it. They never asked. So, on September 20th, 2025, I walked down the aisle alone. 80 feet felt like a mile. 30 empty chairs sat on my side of the room, untouched programs resting neatly on each seat. I felt every absence like a weight pressing against my chest. But the truth is, this story didn't start there. It started 14 months earlier, in a hospital waiting room at 2:17 in the morning. My roommate had been in a bike accident. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough to keep us in the ER for hours. The room was harshly lit, the chairs uncomfortable, and the vending machines broken. I had been sitting there for 3 hours, exhausted and hungry. That's when he approached me. He was wearing a security uniform, his posture relaxed but alert. He asked if I had eaten, and when I said no, he nodded like he'd expected that answer. Without making a big deal out of it, he disappeared and came back a few minutes later with a sandwich and coffee. I thanked him, a little surprised by the gesture. He shrugged it off like it was nothing. We talked for a few minutes, just small things at first. His name was Marcus, and he worked nights. When I asked what that meant, he simply said operations and didn't elaborate. There was something about him that stood out immediately. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it felt intentional. He wasn't trying to impress me or fill silence. He was just present. At one point, I asked if he liked working nights. He said it was when the work mattered most. I didn't understand what he meant, but I remembered the way he said it. When my name was called, I stood to leave. I introduced myself, and he did the same. As I walked away, I noticed a nurse start to address him as doctor before stopping abruptly when he gave him a look. It struck me as odd, but I didn't question it. 3 days later, he found me online and asked if I wanted to get coffee. I said yes. Our first date was simple. We met at a busy market downtown in the middle of the day. He showed up on time, dressed casually, looking like he hadn't slept much. We walked around, shared food, and talked about small things: work, routines, the city. His phone buzzed a few times during lunch. He checked it once, typed a quick response filled with abbreviations I didn't recognize, and then put it away. He apologized, but I told him it was fine. What mattered was that he gave me my full attention afterward. We started seeing each other regularly after that. At first, it was slow, just occasional dinners, late-night conversations, and quiet moments. Then, without really noticing when it happened, it became something more. Marcus worked unpredictable hours. Sometimes he would disappear for an entire day or more. He always explained it as work, emergencies, or night shifts. I didn't push for details because I didn't feel like I needed them. His life was simple. His apartment was small and mostly empty, except for stacks of books. Most of them were medical journals and textbooks. When I asked about them, he said he liked understanding how things worked. I accepted that answer without digging deeper. By the end of the year, I was completely in love with him, not because of what he did or what he might become, but because of who he was with me. He was steady, kind, and quietly dependable in a way I had never experienced before. In March, I finally told my parents about him. My mother sounded pleased at first, her tone bright with curiosity. But the moment I mentioned that he worked in hospital security, everything shifted. She didn't say anything openly critical. She didn't have to. The pause, the careful wording, the polite distance, it all said enough. Still, she insisted they wanted to meet him. I told Marcus, and he didn't hesitate. He agreed immediately, even though he knew it wouldn't go well. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to prepare or impress. He simply accepted it as something that had to be done. Dinner at my parents' house was exactly what I expected. The house itself felt formal and intimidating, filled with quiet judgment. My parents were polite, but their questions were pointed and deliberate. They asked about his education, his career, his future plans. Marcus answered calmly, without trying to embellish or impress. He didn't play along with their expectations, and that seemed to frustrate them more than anything else. At one point, a neighbor mentioned a medical issue her son was having. Marcus listened briefly and then offered a possible explanation with surprising clarity. The table went quiet, and my mother looked at him differently for a moment, as if trying to reassess him. But it didn't last. By the end of the night, nothing had changed. The judgment was still there, just more carefully concealed. On the drive home, the silence between us felt heavy. Later that night, my mother texted me asking to talk about my future. I knew what that meant. Marcus didn't try to reassure me or dismiss it. He just held my hand and stayed quiet. And somehow, that meant more than anything he could have said. Things didn't get better after that dinner. If anything, they got worse. My parents didn't argue loudly or openly. Instead, they applied pressure in quieter ways. Calls, carefully worded messages, and conversations that felt more like negotiations than concern. A few weeks later, my father's letter arrived. It was typed on official letterhead, structured like an academic argument. He wrote about compatibility, about shared intellectual values, about the kind of life they had always envisioned for me. He acknowledged that Marcus seemed kind, but insisted that kindness wasn't enough to sustain a marriage. I read it twice, then put it down and sat in silence for a long time. When I finally called Marcus and told him everything, he didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, he asked one simple question. "Do you still want to marry me?" I said yes. "Then we get married," he replied. There was no anger in his voice, no attempt to defend himself or prove anything, just certainty. That calm confidence steadied me more than any argument could have. My mother tried a different approach. She invited me out for coffee a week later. When I arrived, I realized I wasn't the only one she had invited. Sitting across from her was a man she introduced as Dr. Trevor Ashford. He was everything my parents approved of. Educated, polished, successful, and confident in all the ways Marcus wasn't. The conversation felt staged from the start, as if I had been placed into a scenario designed to make a point. I lasted less than 15 minutes. I stood up, told my mother I was engaged, and walked out. She didn't follow me. After that, the tensions spread through the entire family. Group chats filled with subtle comments and passive observations. Some people asked questions, others stayed silent, but the judgment was unmistakable. My brother didn't confront me directly. Instead, he posted vague messages online about people making mistakes and learning lessons the hard way. I saw it. I didn't respond. Through all of this, Marcus remained the same. He never told me to cut them off or to fight back. He didn't try to win them over either. He simply stayed present. steady in a way that grounded me when everything else felt unstable. We got engaged quietly. No announcement, no celebration from my side of the family, just the two of us, in a simple promise about the life we wanted to build together. I still sent out invitations months later. Part of me hoped something might change, that maybe when it became real, they would reconsider. They didn't. Instead, my mother sent that email, the one explaining why they wouldn't attend, the one that ensured no one else would either. I found out about it secondhand. I remember sitting in my car after reading it, unable to process how deliberate it all was. This wasn't a misunderstanding or hesitation, it was a decision. I called the caterer that same afternoon and canceled over half the seats. My voice didn't even sound like my own when I spoke. The woman on the other end was quiet for a moment before apologizing softly, like she understood more than I had said. The RSVP deadline came and went with nothing from my side, not even a polite decline, just silence. When I met with the venue coordinator to finalize the layout, she offered to rearrange the seating so it wouldn't look so unbalanced. I told her no. I wanted the empty chairs left exactly where they were. I needed to see it. The night before the wedding, everything felt still. My phone stayed quiet all day until that final call from my mother. Her words echoed long after the call ended. Marcus came home late that night and found me sitting on the couch. He didn't ask questions right away. He just sat beside me and took my hand. After a while, he suggested we could cancel, that we could do something smaller later. I shook my head. I didn't want to hide from it. I wanted to go through with it exactly as planned. The next day, I got ready alone. There were no bridesmaids from my side, no family members, no one to share the moment with. The venue coordinator helped me with my dress, offering quiet reassurance without asking too many questions. When it was time, I stood at the entrance and looked out at the room. The empty chairs on my side were impossible to ignore. They felt like a statement, a visible record of every decision my family had made. Marcus stood at the altar, waiting. When he saw me, his expression shifted immediately. There was something in his eyes, regret maybe, or apology for something that wasn't his fault. I started walking. Each step felt deliberate, like I was choosing something with every movement forward. By the time I reached him, my hands were shaking. He took them gently, grounding me. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. We had written our own vows, and his voice broke halfway through his. When it was my turn, I barely made it through without crying. For a moment, when we kissed, everything else faded away. The empty chairs didn't matter. The silence from my family didn't matter. It was just us. The reception started shortly after, and I tried to focus on the people who were there. Marcus's family filled the room with warmth. They welcomed me without hesitation, without conditions. But I kept noticing the empty table reserved for my family. It was set perfectly, untouched, and unnecessary. I couldn't stop looking at it. Later that evening, everything changed. A man collapsed near the dessert table. Panic spread quickly, voices overlapping as people tried to figure out what to do. Before anyone else could react, Marcus moved. It was immediate and instinctive. One second he was beside me, the next he was kneeling on the floor, assessing the situation with complete focus. His entire presence shifted. His voice was calm but authoritative as he gave instructions. People responded to him without hesitation, as if they were used to following his lead. Someone brought an AED. Another person assisted with compressions. The coordination was seamless, like a rehearsed response. I stood frozen, watching him. This wasn't the man I thought I knew. Or maybe it was, but a version I had never seen before. Then someone called him Doctor. At first I thought I misheard it, but then I heard it again, and again. The emergency responders arrived and immediately recognized him. There was no confusion, no questioning, just acknowledgement and respect.
When it was over, he left briefly with them and returned not long after. I was still trying to process what I had just seen. "Is he all right?" I asked. "He'll be fine," Marcus said. I looked at him, really looked at him. "Why were they calling you doctor?" I asked. There was a pause before he answered. "Because I am one." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. I waited for him to explain, to clarify, but he simply met my gaze calmly. "I'm a trauma surgeon," he said, "chief of trauma at Penn." For a moment, nothing made sense. Everything I thought I knew about him shifted all at once. The late nights, the calls, the medical books, it all clicked into place. "You told me you worked security," I said quietly. "I do," he replied. "But that's not all I do." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt shocked, even hurt. Another part of me understood, in a strange way, why he hadn't said anything. "We'll talk later," he said gently. "Right now, we finish this." So we did. But nothing was the same after that moment.